Good afternoon, everybody. This is Diggs. It's another beautiful day out here in the Pacific Northwest. Today, we're going to be talking about the different elements of the game and what their identities are currently in Global. We're going to be looking at all the UR units and their mastery abilities that are associated with them per element. We're also going to be looking at the different vision cards, espers, and of course, equipment for those elements. And we're going to try and pull out what element is most free-to-play friendly, what element is out there for the whales, and what do the other elements kind of have with them that's special, or are they going to need some work? Let's go ahead and dig in. All right, everybody. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is the mastery abilities, because I think the mastery abilities are so important and are potentially why some decisions are made around units that are released in Global, when, where, why, and so forth. For example, you take a look at Valentine Salier here. Valentine Salier is no longer a limited unit on the GL side, and part of that might be because up until Valentine Salier came out, Oron was the only Ice Elemental unit that had an Ice Elemental Mastery. So it made sense, right, that Valentine Salier was released because it was going to be a while before another Ice Elemental Mastery unit did come out. Now, there are some interesting trends here as we are looking at all the different elements. Most notably, Light and Water both have the most amount of mastery ability units. Light has 1 MR and it has 1 limited time unit. Water has 1 MR and 3 limited time units. One important thing to note about Water, though, is that Tidus was given as a free unit, and so he was relatively easy to max out, and so we will keep that in mind as we are going forward. Also interesting, we, besides Krace, did not have a Water Element Mastery unit. Same with Corwell in the last recent update. For Wind, that was not limited in UR, right? We had Krace, she's an MR, but we didn't actually have a UR element for or a UR unit in the general pool for those elements. They were all limited time. Looking at Lightning, you can see that Lightning is also lacking in that there is no Lightning Elemental UR unit with a mastery besides 9S, who is a limited time unit, right? Of course, we have Silma, who is given to everybody. We have Alim as well, and both of those are great units, particularly Silma, but we don't have one in the general pool. And for Earth, we only have one, and that's Luel, and the rest are limited, and there's 3 limited. So when we're looking at elements and kind of their use and power level in Global, it's really interesting to consider that Dark has 2 base units with Dark Masteries. Light has 4 base units, 3 of them UR at the most with Mastery, and Fire and Ice come in second with the most URs that are in the base game. And it's really interesting that those are the elements that are really the most dominant in the game currently, and we're going to see some ongoing trends as we go through this information. Let's take a look at VCs though. So I did list all of the UR VCs. The 1 MR VC I did include was actually a Vow of Love, just because I felt like it needed to be included since it does have some viability. And I could have put like Secret Orders in, but I really wanted to try and keep the UR VC only because I really wanted to keep in viable potential strategies. Not that Secret Orders is not viable, but people who might be using VCs in top level play. Now, I did go through and I pruned the list a little bit because not all of these VCs see use, right? You're not seeing Golem placed a lot on units. You're not seeing, Death Machine, for example, when you might be able to put something like Ildira's VC on, or another specific elemental VC that might give area resistance for the elemental units, right? So that while some of those VCs might see use, they are, I would say, not used on a daily basis by the player base. And what's interesting when we pull these away is we see some very kind of cool trends and interesting trends about the element. Probably the first thing I noticed is that Ice did not have any limited time VCs. Fryevia VC is supposed to come out sometime soon, but we have never had a limited time ice elemental VC. And this is going to be something that kind of shows ice's identity and is going to kind of identify ice as like a element that rewards players who have been playing for a long time, right? You think about ice being the only element for a long time that had access to Ice Brand, right? That was the only element that had access to a elemental buffing weapon for quite a long time, right? So ice is one of those elements that, you know, the power level has always been consistent, is always there. And it definitely rewards players who have been around for a long time. Now, Earth is a little bit of a struggle here at only 4 VCs that are really viable. And this is going to also be a trend that we see. Even with the, introduction of Zazan into Global, we still don't have the equipment, the espers to really back Earth up. And you'll see that here in just a second. Lightning has a very similar issue to fire here, in that lightning's identity through VCs is very confusing, right? And it takes definitely a high skill ceiling to incorporate lightning units or fire units into your comp. And then you have water, light, and dark, which I would kind of consider the introductory elements into the game. Both of them have really good 5 base VCs. And then, in Dark's case, you don't need to have the limited VCs to be extremely powerful, right? And you could make an argument that you don't need the limited VCs from Light to be extremely powerful, particularly with the MR VC that was just released in JP. But I do think that Scions is pretty essential for the Light element. So for that aspect, I'm actually going to say that Dark is a little bit more free to play accessible. And very similar with Water, the 2 limited VCs are very powerful there as well. Finally, I do want to touch on Wind's VCs, because Wind is actually shaping up. Remember, Corwell was the first mastery unit that just came out for Wind that was in the base pool. Wind is actually turning out to be the most pay-to-win element in the game. You can see we have 3 limited time VCs here, all of which do see use. And we have, basically units that are extremely powerful like 2B, Little Leela, that are, one would argue, purchasable or only purchasable or accessible by whales. So Wind is actually becoming the whale element. And I think a lot of people don't think of Wind as a whale element. They kind of think of potentially like fire with double cost or dark with double cost, right? Like, people are really focused on the double cost units. And what's actually going to get you, and what actually makes a element kind of like a whale element, is how viable the VCs are, how accessible they are, and how many of them are limited time. Because so often power level can really be tied, yes to units, right? But a lot of times to vision cards. Now let's talk about this final slide, where I did add in espers and I added in equipment. And I think this just really shows, specifically with Dark and Ice, that their identities are very dominant, right? So like Dark is a very dominant new player accessible element. It has the most espers that are 3-star with Dark Attack up. It has VCs that are both very powerful, accessible, and useful, right? You don't have to have the limited time VCs to be effective. And it is just overall a great starting element. On the flip side, you have Ice here that has over 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different weapons, or 4 different weapons, best in slot on 8 different Ice characters, that if you have played the game for a long time, if you have been, just building your weapons as the game goes along, your Ice composition is going to be naturally powerful. Ice naturally rewards longtime players, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. And you can look at, Light, and you can say, well, hey, Light has, 5 units where the sword is best in slot that just came out. It has very similar amounts of VCs to Dark. And I would say, yeah, Light and Water are also pretty accessible elements. However, I really feel like the VCs particularly Scion and particularly Ildira's VC and the Steki Dane VC are so important for those elements that if you don't have access to those, you know, you're going to be in trouble. And who knows if the Sword of Light event is going to be coming back, because it is tied to the Final Fantasy 1 event. So who knows if we're going to see a repeat of the Sword of Light event. So factoring that in mind, light and water could potentially be almost like trap elements for a lot of players. And I would be wary going into the future, recommending these elements, particularly since a lot of us, you know, might already have these Swords of Light or Tidus in our comp or these limited VCs. Fire and lightning now, taking a look at these two, they're very similar, and we had talked about the skill ceiling on the previous page. They both have access to 2 espers. They both have access to elemental buffing equipment, right? Coral Sword is best in slot on 2 different units, and the Lightning Spear is best on 9S and a limb. Flame Tongue, very similar. And Lightning and Fire have this situation where their VCs are a little confusing. And this might change, right? Lightning is going to be getting buffed when Cloud comes out. We're going to get some very lightning slash oriented VCs, espers, units, and lightning is going to kind of gain an identity that it hasn't had before, right? But right now, through lightning's VCs and lightning's equipment and espers, lightning is a little confused, and I would say it doesn't have a solid identity. It might have more of an identity when Cloud comes out, but it's still weird that there is a lot of magic type VCs, right? Out of all of the UR VCs, one of them is slash based, 2 of them are magic based, and 1 of them is missile based, right? And you know, there's only really 1 UR lightning elemental mage plus Selir. It's just a little, you know, confused, I would say. Fire is pretty much the same way because you have access to rain. Fire does have an identity of being a little bit more defensive in its VCs, but I do think Fire takes a high skill ceiling to be able to pull off. And Fire is one of those elements that I would argue does not have an entire identity yet in the global world. It's definitely associated with tanking right now with Rain and King Mont, but I would like to think that there is a world where Fire is kind of more synergistic than it already is with both Pierce, magic, and tanking. And I think that's where they're going right now, but we are not fully there yet. And you consider we also have like Raldor, and it's hard to pull off a vision card that really would buff Raldor in the fire elemental realm as well. And we just have so many versatile fire units that it also gets a little muddy, and you're gonna have to work and really figure out what's gonna work there. Finally, we have Wind, and Wind has Tetrasulfid and Malboro, no weapons that really buff Wind element. And so Wind is really coming down to be the most pay to win element in the game. And you know, that's tough. It's hard to acknowledge that, right? We got Corwell for free, and maybe the reason Corwell was given out for free is because it's a very pay to win heavy element, and Gooby realized that. You think about the Wind element over the next couple months, we're getting Tifa for free, we're getting Gargus for free, right? Velouche is going to be coming out into the permanent pool. So Wind is seeing a lot of things added to it that are both more accessible, and it's going to make the units with mastery abilities more viable and available to everybody. So it's interesting to see kind of where the elements are at right now, and very similarly probably where they were at in JP at this time too, and kind of where the game is going and how it's changing as it's heading that way. Anyway, everybody, I hope you guys like this video. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a while. I just think it's really interesting to talk about the elemental synergy in the game right now. If you guys do want to support me, please use my affiliate link, dig.gs/coins. As always, even if you're not buying Amazon coins, before you check out on Amazon, if you just go to dig.gs/coins and then go to the checkout box, that still supports me. I get a percentage of whatever you purchase as long as you click on that checkout box, even if you're not buying coins. So thank you so much for supporting me, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.